What is up, guys? Well, we have 1 month down in the year of 2023, and as I did a few times last year and will do much more consistently this year, I want to give a wrap up of all of the films that I saw in the previous month. And so I've got 8 movies, 8 brand new releases that I saw in January of 2023 that I'm going to rank from worst to best. I do have a couple of full-length reviews for these films. I will link those as I get to them if you want my more in-depth thoughts. But some of these are films that I either just didn't have the time to review or didn't feel like it was necessary to do a full review, but still want to discuss my thoughts on them. And I gotta say, for a January, this January was actually pretty good. There was only maybe 1 or 2 movies that are like, oh yeah, that's a January movie. Yeah, we're here. We're at the beginning of a new year. The rest of them were actually surprisingly good, or a movie that I normally would think would fall into that January movie category and had a lot more merit to it. So starting off at number 8 for me is probably one of the most talked about movies, if not the most talked about movie of this month, at least as far as my circles go, and that is Skinamarink. And let me say this is a film that is going to be absolute love or hate, like extreme. I don't see too many people being in the middle on this one. I've talked to a lot of people that really appreciate how non-conventional and abstract this is, how it's just kind of creating an experience through images rather than actually telling a story, in my opinion at least. And all the power to you. If you got something out of this, that's the beauty of art. That's the beauty of film. We all get something different out of it when we watch it. I got nothing out of this except for 100 minutes of pretty much misery. Like, I went into this knowing this was probably not going to be my cup of tea, but I severely underestimated how not my cup of tea this movie is. There's not really much of a story going on here. There's barely any dialogue. The little bit of dialogue that you get has to be enhanced with subtitles because the quality of the audio and visuals are intentionally really low quality. And it's essentially 100 minutes of just shots of this house, where you got these 2 kids that wake up, their parents are gone, and the windows and the doors of their house have disappeared, and it's just about kind of creating that childlike paranoia, that childlike fear that's got a bit of a dreamlike quality to it. And it's not my thing. That's as respectful as I could put it. It is not my thing. I was bored to tears. I was almost borderline getting a headache from just the repetitive imagery over and over and over again. This felt like a genuinely interesting horror short that should have been about 20 to 30 minutes that was stretched out to 100 minutes and not filled with anything to actually merit that runtime. And so I wish nothing but good things for the director. I'm glad that this has some success to it. There's been a lot of buzz and a lot of virality to it. So he will go on to do bigger and hopefully better things. But for me, this was absolutely the worst experience that I've had with a film in January 2023 and for quite a lot of my YouTube career. Coming in at number 7 is going to be Fear, and this is our January horror film. This is typically the movies that get riddled throughout January and February in previous years, and this is a movie I had heard jack shit about. I did not see a poster or a trailer for this. I did not see it get advertised anywhere on social media. I didn't hear anybody talking about it. I didn't see any reviews pop up for it on YouTube. It was only by happenstance that I was looking through my local theater trying to see what movies were coming out, and I come across this poster and I'm like, what the fuck is this skull ? Fear? I've never even heard of that. What is it? That's a new movie? And so I just decided to throw $6 away and go check it out. And whoa, this is one of the worst written horror films I've seen in a very long time. There's no question whatsoever why nobody's talking about it, because they probably saw how terrible it was and tried to bury it. Just put it out there, maybe we'll get a few bucks for it, but let's not draw any attention to it. I don't want more negative reviews than we already are gonna get. I mean, the thing's got a 25% on Rotten Tomatoes right now and nobody saw it. So essentially you have this film where a group of friends have gathered together at this isolated lodge in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what time period it takes place in. I want to say that they said it was modern, like 2023, but it also feels like it's being set during COVID, like during 2020 or even 2021, the early months. So you have that paranoia where everybody's been isolated from each other. Nobody's seen each other. Nobody's wanted to come in contact with each other. They've all gotten tested so that they can all hang out at this lodge for the weekend because the main couple, the guy, is going to propose and he wants all of his friends there for that event. And so that is just the setup. And where the movie goes from there is that there are some weird things going on in this lodge that brings about everybody's worst fear and manifests it in a various variation of ways, and people start to get paranoid, people start to turn on each other. It's a setup we've seen 1,000 times. It's a setup we've seen done 1,000 times better before. What I really did not like about this movie, for one, the characters did not feel like actual people. They all felt like they were reading cue cards. Like, I don't know if it was the writing or the acting or a combination of both, but nobody really felt like an actual human being in this. They just felt like a person in a movie and not a good one. Also, the chemistry for this being a really close-knit group of friends, did not buy it for 1 second. I didn't buy that most of these people would be hanging out with each other. And I'm not saying that a white guy can't commingle with a group of black people, but the main character is a white dude whose personality, I don't believe for a single solitary fucking second would be friends with any of these people. I mean, he's got like this ultra nerdy, like cerebral, philosophical thing going on about him where he wrote a book about fear and how fear manifests itself. And then he'll stop and pivot and talk about the old times on the streets of Detroit. And it's like, dude, no, you're not that character. I don't buy it. Even his chemistry with his girlfriend, his soon-to-be fiance, never bought for a second that they would actually be a couple. He just doesn't fit. He doesn't fit with this group of people at all. But beyond that, the movie can never really pick a direction. Are we doing this whole cursed witchcraft thing where we're going to be bringing about the manifestations of fears and create paranoia? Or are we doing some weird political commentary on COVID and the paranoia that created and the influence of the media and people's tendency to believe the media? Like, there was so many segments in this movie where it seemed like it was just going to pause. We're going to pause what we're doing right now and we're going to talk about COVID without saying COVID. They just say the virus. And it just was such a turnoff. As somebody that I'm done talking about COVID. I hope we never really have to revisit the days of 2020 and 2021 ever again. It feels like that was 10 years just in a couple of years. And now it feels like we're starting to get out of that and we're moving on. I'm of that mindset. I don't want to live in the past and talk about that shit. At the same time, it just seems very odd with like, what are you trying to say? There's a point in the film where they actually are having this hallucination where a news report comes onto the TVs and they're like, a new variant of the virus is out and it's worse than anything. And even just a few droplets can kill you within a few hours. Do not go outside, lock your doors. And so that's kind of the device to keep them inside of this lodge where any normal person would be like, this shit's fucked up. I'm getting out of here. Peace. And instead of just using it as a device to keep everybody there, they keep framing it like it's something we're supposed to be commenting on. And the movie's trying to teach us something or get through our heads about something. It even ends with the big text of "Don't fear" before the credits roll. And it's like, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say we're all stupid for believing COVID? COVID was a real fucking thing. We have a movie later on in this list that handles the COVID commentary in a much more creative and entertaining way. This just aggravated the living fuck out of me. So there's little to nothing, honestly, aside from the opening credits. The opening credits were pretty badass. But if I'm telling you the opening credits are a positive, that means the rest of this movie was fucked up. Number 6 is going to be Kids vs. Aliens. This is a movie I saw last September at Fantastic Fest in Austin, Texas, and it was released to VOD this month, and it was by the guy that directed Hobo with a Shotgun, which I've never seen. And it was one of my least favorite films from the festival. It just did not work for me. I could see some people really enjoying this. It has kind of that Stranger Things flavor to it where we got these young kids. They're going to be taking on this adult situation. There's a bit of an 80s throwback vibe to it with, they're filming little wrestling matches and stuff and having their own homemade armor and doing the whole Dungeons and Dragons vibe. And eventually aliens descend onto this town and the kids and the teenagers around them had to fight against this alien menace. And it sounded like it was going to be a really fun movie. We saw it at a midnight screening, I believe the second night of the festival. And it just wasn't nearly as fun or as creative or as enjoyable as I hoped it was going to be. I didn't think that any of the kids were all that fun, all that memorable of characters. They were fine, but no standouts. And you kind of have to have standouts with a scenario like this. You think Stranger Things, you think Goonies. You can think of a couple different characters that are standouts. Not here, in my opinion. The teenage characters, I pretty much hated all the way across the board. One of them especially, a bully, was just like so psychotic level of a bully that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. Like, not to say that there aren't psychotic kids out there and murderous kids, but that's kind of a trope that movies and shows fall into that frustrates me, where you can have a bully without them being like an absolute sociopathic murdering son of a bitch. And this guy was just off the rails, and some of the things that he does in the third act especially just really leaves a bad taste in your mouth, at least it did for me. And even the alien stuff, like, it's just such an intentionally low budget version of that. It's going for like that weird grindhouse lo-fi look that it felt like costumes that just walked out of Spirit Halloween. And so I just didn't get much out of this. I could see some people really enjoying it. If you like more grindhouse, intentionally low budget type stuff, give it a shot. But for me, wasn't all that fun. Number 5 is going to be Plane. And this is kind of your, I'll say, generic or more standard action movie that kind of comes out. And it's like, okay, that's fine. This is a movie that is built for a Sunday afternoon on the couch. And it's got Gerard Butler as this pilot. And you've got Michael Coulter, the guy that played, what's his name? Not Iron Fist. Luke Cage? Luke Cage? Luke Cage. So Gerard Butler's the pilot. Michael Coulter is this prisoner that's being transferred on the plane. There's a bunch of other regular citizens on board. And because of weather issues, the plane crashes in this island that is pretty much taken over by a bunch of terrorists, mercenaries, whatever you want to call them. There's no government there. And so they have to figure out a way to survive this situation and get off of this island. And it is a perfectly serviceable 3-star action film. There's not really anything stand out about it. There's no awesome action sequence or awesome fight sequence or shooting sequence. There's no huge memorable character arc. There's no real awesome chemistry or awesome back and forth buddy cop chemistry between Michael Coulter and Gerard Butler. It's all pretty much middle of the road serviceable entertainment. And I'm fine with that. That's what I expected when I walked into this. I didn't expect much more. It's not a movie to go and spend money and take the whole family out to the theater for, but if it pops up on a streaming service, you can kill a couple of hours in much worse ways. So, perfectly fine. Not one of Gerard Butler's best. Certainly not one of the worst action thrillers I've seen. It's just middle of the road. Number 4 is going to be Sick. This is another film that I saw at Fantastic Fest. They got a release to, I believe, Paramount Plus this month. And I gotta be honest with you, I have been shocked at how much people have really enjoyed and praised this movie. I thought it was fine. When I saw it, and what it felt like the vibe of everybody at the festival, I didn't hear anybody overly praising this film, was that was a pretty mildly clever, entertaining, well-made slasher film. Not really much beyond that. And so it's come out this month, and I've had people saying this should have been to theaters, this would have killed, this is one of the best things that Kevin Williamson has done in a long time, one of the best slashers, and if you genuinely had that experience with it, I'm happy for you. But it's one of those films where I'm like, wow, did not expect that. I perfectly understood why it went to streaming service, because it felt like that type of experience to me. So you have a slasher setup to where it is March 2020, just when COVID and all the paranoia and all the mania starts to hit the US. People are masked up, wearing fucking chem suits from Breaking Bad and going out to convenience stores and buying up all the toilet paper and all that crazy shit. And you have these characters that are now isolated in this cabin for quarantine, and a dude with a knife shows up. And what I liked about this movie was that the Kevin Williamson written meta commentary on COVID and on how people reacted to COVID, I thought was pretty entertaining. I thought it was pretty clever.
Oh my God! Just one moment. Unlock the door! Unlock the door! You have a mask, don't you? Your mask. What?
And, you know, I'm somebody that fortunately I did not have any major losses with COVID. I didn't lose a family member. I didn't end up in the hospital. So I'm able to probably have more fun with that concept than some are. If you're ultra sensitive to COVID, if you had a really dark experience with that time, I would probably suggest you don't watch this, because it's not going to be something you're going to laugh at. But I was able to laugh at it. And so the first act, when they're really focusing on the early days of 2020, and the last act where you start to get the motivations of the killers and the twist reveals and all that meta commentary and how COVID fits into the motivations, I thought all that was really clever. But there's a middle hour of this film that's just regular old slasher chase movie, and not a fantastic one. There's not enough people in the film to have a high body count and to have a bunch of gnarly kills. There's not enough really to do in this setting of this cabin in the middle of nowhere to have a lot of really cool set pieces. And so it's just a hooded dude with a knife chasing around a couple of girls for an hour. And was there some good tension? Sure. Was there some well-directed chase stuff? Absolutely. But when your bookended chapters are the most interesting part of your film, it makes me wish that whole middle section had kept up with that pace. And so by the end of it, I was like, okay, that was mildly clever, that was entertaining, but nothing to write home about. And then it came out and most people disagreed. And that's fine. Number 3 is going to be Megan, Chucky's new girlfriend. And this is a film that on its surface, I was like, okay, there's your January horror film. But then it got closer to release. You started to get the early reviews out there. You know, the Rotten Tomatoes score dropped and it was mostly positive. I think this thing had like a 97%, 95% at one point. And that's rare for a horror film in general, let alone a January horror film. And so I got a little bit more intrigued with it. I pretty much saw from the trailer, like I can pretty much predict where this is going to go. And it is fairly predictable with where it goes, but it was still entertaining. It was still fun. It still had a good humor to it. It still had some pretty good sequences there, even though it was cut down to PG-13, that I can imagine the R-rated cut, whenever we get to see it, will actually be pretty gnarly. Some setups for some really good kills. The killer character of Megan, there's some charm there. It's basically a remake of the Child's Play 2019 remake, and there's debate out there about which one was written first. Whatever, that movie is, fucking 4 years old at this point, so that one came first. But there was enough different about it. There was enough little turns on that storyline that I was able to enjoy it. It wasn't something that I'm chomping at the bit for a sequel, but it's something where I'll absolutely enjoy watching a sequel. So one of those little Blumhouse experiments that actually turns out to be a pretty good setup for what's going to be probably a long-lasting franchise. And so for a January horror film especially, not bad. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Infinity Pool, and this is a wild, weird movie. I did a full review for it. I'll put that card up here. I'm not going to get into the actual plot of the movie here, but it is a really out there sci-fi horror concept that is causing the conversation about the accountability of the rich, as well as what guides our decisions. Is it morals, or is it fear of the repercussions and punishment for bad decisions? And I really enjoyed what the movie was discussing. A lot of times when a movie is focused on a message and is focused on creating a conversation, sometimes I feel like that can cloud over everything else in the film and it just gets a little bit preachy to me. This one I actually really dug because just the surface value story was interesting and wild and weird and macabre all on its own, but that conversation that it creates afterwards actually gives a little bit of a value to the movie that makes you continue to think about it, continue to talk about it. But it is a movie that I'll probably only ever watch once. So it's really well directed, it's extremely well acted, it's got a really interesting concept and story to it. It is not going to be for everybody. It's going to be kind of along the lines of Skinamarink, but not as extreme of a love and hate. But I really dug my one time watching it, even though it's not a movie I'll probably go back to anytime soon. But my favorite movie of January 2023 was actually Missing, and this is kind of a pseudo sequel to Searching from a few years ago with John Cho, and that was one of the movies that I had no hope for. I'm not really big on the whole found footage type of subgenre. This isn't exactly found footage, but it's cousins. It belongs in that same ballpark, and I really enjoyed Searching. So I walked into this one expecting to like it much more than I did with Searching, and I would say that this one is on par with Searching, if not maybe a little bit better. I would have to rewatch Searching to say for sure or not, but you have a concept to where the whole movie is shown through the desktop of this little girl. So Zoom calls, Google searches, webcams, things like that is what's being utilized to tell your story. And her mother has gone missing while on vacation with her boyfriend, and it's her trying to figure out where her mother is, solve this mystery all on the desktop of her computer. And I thought it was actually really well done. I thought it was a really well done thriller, a lot of solid twists and turns, most of which I did not see coming. Unfortunately, the one that I did see coming was the big reveal at the end, so could have been a little better maybe in that respect. But I really enjoyed the ride that I went on with this movie because you're following along, you're given just the same amount of information as the protagonist. And as she figures things out, you begin to figure things out. And sometimes she'll think of something, you're like, oh, well, what about that? And that'll come in later on. And so a thriller, a mystery should kind of give you that experience whenever you're trying to solve it along with the characters. Some really sweet stuff in there regarding the bond of a mother and a daughter that I really enjoyed as well. The main performance here, pretty much the vehicle of the movie, is Storm Reed, and she is very good in this. Keep an eye out for her, for about 3 or 4 weeks from now on The Last of Us, who also does an awesome job with the role that she is given with Riley. Really, the only thing that holds this back is that even as much as I like Searching, those style movies, this non-conventional, desktop type of storytelling, they're not movies that I necessarily like to rewatch. I feel like my first experience with it is the experience where I'm going to get all the shocks and the surprises, and it's not really a thriller or a mystery that I would want to go back through that whole desktop angle again. So that holds it back a little bit for me just on rewatch value. But I will say, even with that being said, if you're somebody that does not like those types of movies typically, if you don't care for found footage or even things like Unfriended that are kind of a version of that, I would say to give Searching and Missing a shot, because the story definitely makes that type of storytelling worth it, and it's one of the better experiences you're going to have with that type of storytelling. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for the playlist of all of my 2023 release reviews so far, and I'm also going to put my ranking of all, 86, 88 movies that I saw from last year. Big fat ass video. Go check that out, all the movies of 2022. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this year of reviews, rankings, and everything in between. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.